lay out an agenda for this talk because there are just so many multiple and conflicting viewpoints on this. What I would like everyone to do essentially is to focus on, I think we know and we've read a lot about what has happened, how things are unfolding. I think I'd like, as far as is possible, everyone to address the issue of what happens now. Now that we have reached here, now that the entire question of sexual harassment and sexual attack is out in the open, and for some portion of society at least, it serves as some kind of a warning sign. But clearly that is just the start, and that clearly is not enough from here on. So let's begin straight away by, and in case you're wondering why there are so many men on this whole panel, let me tell you, you have to take this up with Vivek Menezes, whose idea it was. I said, how can we have so many men on a panel that talks about this? But he said we need to get a male perspective in on this, so we are trying to do that. So let's have Supriya begin about where you... Shanta Gokhale will be on the panel, but she had to have lunch, so she'll hopefully join us as soon as she can. Supriya, why don't you begin?
Hello. Hi.
Yeah, let's use another one. Thank you. I may be alone in this on this platform, but I think Vivek had the right idea, and I'll tell you why, Samar. We met 2 nights ago, and you said, "Oh, I saw that you criticized something I wrote," and I couldn't remember what it was because I usually like everything that Samar writes. And this morning, I remember that what he may have seen was a tweet of mine, in which I linked to a very good essay that he wrote for Scroll, in which he addressed the Me Too stories coming out of journalism and wrote a wonderful defense of Priya Ramani, one of the finest editors in India, to whom he's married. And I was through the the initial days of those Me Too stories coming out, I was in a vile mood. I was angry and unhappy. And I tweeted Samar's piece saying, "Oh, so it looks like if a senior male journalist has to defend a woman journalist, he has to be married to her." And the reason for that was because Priya has had has had a wonderful and wide-ranging career. She's worked with several great journalists, some of whom are men that women in the profession like and admire and trust very much. And not a single one of them stepped up to the plate and actually put his byline to... I did. Just to a piece. You'll get to say a piece, Salil. To a defense of Priya, or to someone who could say...
Those mics. This mic, no, but it's off.
Or to someone who could say, you know, I worked with Priya in an office where these things were happening, and I'm going to corroborate what she's saying. So to me, it's really important to have men speak up in public. We've been hearing endlessly now that, oh, you know, in locker rooms and in private, men are talking about how this movement, as they call it, is overblown. That many of these stories are rubbish, that they aren't being treated seriously, and that men can't talk to women anymore. I mean, you know what? Come on stage and say that. Let's hear you defend that. Which is why I was very interested in an all-male panel with and the male perspective.
This locker room is where exactly we need to go after that?
I wouldn't know.
I have to say that when all these tales broke, and this is where I think perhaps this is the male perspective. When I was first really aware of how widespread sexual harassment was, and I wasn't that aware some years ago before this entire Me Too movement began, I was actually taken aback. And that kind of indicates, you know, how unprepared Indian men are, and men in general, and how ignorant they are. And I have no shame in saying that I was really surprised. And I said, really, women undergo this kind of thing, so common? And then after that, it emerged that everyone I knew, almost every woman I know, including my wife, including my sisters, everybody had been sexually harassed or abused in some way. And for some time, I was completely taken aback and depressed, and I had no idea how to deal with this. I said, how could this have been happening, and how come I didn't know about this? I think that says a lot about it. So it's been a big, in that sense, a learning experience, and I will say that a man cannot ever completely understand what it means to be, unless of course they've undergone it, that's also possible, sexually harassed or sexually attacked. So I think for men, this is a whole new learning curve. This is what I think, and I think it's a process of evolution.
Well, I suppose it's impossible to grow up as a man in India with friends, women friends, and mothers and sisters and cousins, and not be aware of the extent of sexual harassment and feel helpless about it all the time. Every single person I know has had a story that they've told me, including my mother. I've lived with this awareness. But the extent of the anger and the rage, I think, that young women feel, and justifiably so, I didn't think came into really sharp focus last year when we had the first list, the Me Too list, that came out of academia by a woman called Raya Sarkar. And I'm going to talk about this from my perspective as a journalist, because suddenly, and we were talking about this earlier, I and my colleagues have been called upon to be judge in situations. You have people making accusations and people wanting the press to take up these accusations and act upon them. And it's been a really complex process of trying to decide what is credible, what is not credible. And so when the first list came out, we wrote a piece about the list, but we didn't name anybody on it. But then we went up and did a series of quite rigorous follow-ups over the course of the months, looking at what seemed to be cases that many of these had happened many years before, many decades before in some cases, calling people, establishing corroboration, and we published that. And then when this wave started, I think it was on a Friday or Saturday night, again, we were not sure, it was popping up so quickly on social media. How do you decide what to report, what not to report? And so it took us a few hours to frame some guidelines, and we decided that we would not deal with anonymous complaints, that we would have people name themselves, and then we would have to seek a response from the person who was accused. And then over time we've gone and done much more detailed investigations about the seemingly very egregious cases. But it is so widespread, it's almost as if we have to make a call now on what to report and what not to report, which sometimes, again, seems quite unfair. Everybody's story is powerful and valid, but we just don't have the resources sometimes to evaluate them and to report them. So this is among the problems we've been facing, or the challenges.
Which brings us to the question, of course, of due process, which is a term that we hear a lot, about the fact that how do you judge some of these which are fake, which are not, etc. You want to begin from the whole question of due process?
Yes, and I also want to touch upon something also just to endorse what you said, because I felt similarly depressed as what Samar described it when I saw the extent of it, just in terms of Facebook posts by women I knew who were close friends, and it showed me, I was not tone deaf, I knew that this is a major problem in India and the world. I live in London, but to see that how widespread it was, and I was also extremely aware that these were women from privilege, of certain class background who were speaking out. There are lots of women whose stories we don't hear, who treat it as a fact of life. I work at the Human Rights Foundation in London, and one of the cases that we have been working on is with the Unilever company, where if you are a woman in a tea plantation and want a job in Kenya, it's a place called Kericho, and I've done some research there too, you cannot get a job unless you meet the foreman the night before in his guest house. I mean, this is a reality. And people at Unilever did not know that. So, I mean, my point is the stories of this kind get completely anonymous. And what angered me more was certain male responses that came out of it. One of them saying that this is all for publicity. And someone asked very brilliantly that, can you remember the names of the women that have been involved in these cases, except for a few high-profile journalists, and most people cannot. But we all know the men who did it. So it's, nobody does it for publicity. I mean, that's a given. But in terms of due process, I think I had a similar question that you raised, Naresh, that can you take an anonymous list and then begin with it's a starting point of a good story. As a journalist, my responsibility is the starting point of a story that you investigate. And I think the good gold standard journalism is what Ronan Farrow has done in New Yorker on one hand, and what Susan Chida and Catherine Einhorn have done in the New York Times, for which they've been quite rightly given the Pulitzer Prize. That you really have to start unpacking the story, and yes, it means the survivor in this case, she has to go through and relive some of the moments again, and it requires enormous courage to do so, and I don't for a moment discount that. But for it to be a story, and story is only the means, and this is the due process part, that why have these women decided to name names and shame people? Because the so-called due process simply hasn't worked. The Vishaka guidelines, many companies don't have them, many organizations don't have, NGOs do not have them, they don't know how to go about doing it, the way they are constructing and constituting, and also there's a justified focus right now on the entertainment industry and media industry. But NGOs, I'm sure there are stories waiting to be told. More important, corporate India. I think that's the next shoe that has to fall. I hope it does, and I hope the kind of stories we read, I think the print had a story today that how the whole thing is dying down because Akbar can write a piece now and Suvan Shetty is about to get married, so everything is hunky-dory. And I think that has to stop. We have to keep the pressure on. Most important, men have to listen.
I think one of the ways forward, in fact, was something that I thought Scroll did very well last year, which is that in a very anarchic moment, suddenly you have an anonymous list come out. You don't know who's made the accusation. It's very tempting then to go and speak to the other person involved, who is the man who's named, but then you're giving him a platform on which to declare his innocence that may not necessarily, be addressing the imbalance of power. And what Scroll did was very rightly to keep the focus on the institutions over here, which were the reason for a list like this to come out in the first place. There was, the sort of the frustration and the anger that led, young women, young academics to name these men anonymously on an explosive list, was simply because they knew no one at their universities was listening. That sexual harassment committees were, either non-existent or disempowered. And so to me, that's perhaps much less glamorous, and it's also very hard to do. But that seems to me to be something that needs to be done in every industry.
But also, and this is among the things we've been talking about, is how due process also takes very long, can be very painful. And so if the complainant in the Tarun Tejpal case had named and shamed, that case is still going on. And so how do you reconcile all of this is among the things people are talking about. And yes, institutions are failing, but sort of due process takes time.
Let me just add to that directly, because you said we follow due process, and the first stage in that is coming forward, or by grounding all the stories and tying up all the loose ends. And as you said, that every aspect of it should be revealed by proper examination. In Bangalore, which is home to Sandalwood is the Kannada film industry, it's called Sandalwood. There's a leading actor, she's been around for some time, called Sanjana Galrani. Sanjana Galrani last month or so said that a guy called Arjun Sarja, who's a very well-known Kannada film actor, had harassed her about 2 years ago, and he and the director went on repeating a scene, some kind of kissing scene or something like that, and caused her no end of trauma. After she spoke about it, so she went public. She was happy to go public. She said, I know the consequences, I am going public with this, so she did. So it was everywhere. The next day, and a lot of the things that we discussed happened in, in that sense, larger cities, and Bangalore, God help us, is large enough, but still, it's still in that sense a mental backwater. There was a backlash almost immediately, first from his family, who started, speaking about her in most uncomplimentary terms, said that she is doing this, of course, entirely for publicity, and she said, we are going to file a case against her. And finally, they filed a police complaint against her and said that we are now going to file a defamation case against her, criminal defamation. And at which point there was silence for some time, and within a week she emerged. There was a Kannada film actor and minister who just died recently called Ambarish. Now Ambarish is, said, I will mediate. And the next day, it had disappeared by then from the front pages. And on Bangalore Times, which is, Goa Times, Bombay Times, a lot of frivolous news, at the bottom of the front page, there was this statement from Sanjana Galvani saying that I stand by everything I said about Arjun Sarja. All this happened to me. However, after Ambarish sir intervened and to quieten down everything, I have decided to compromise and apologize to him. So in his presence, in Ambarish's presence, it was all done and it was portrayed everywhere, including in the media, as a case of something that has been handled well. So they withdrew the case and everything went back to normal. And the next day again she was asked, she said, I stand by everything I have said. Nothing has changed. But again she said the same thing in different words. She said, for the sake of peace and because of respect for Ambarish sir, I have decided to apologize to him. So then what happened then to your due process?
I'm in a position now where there have been so many stories that have come out in the media and in the creative industries in Bombay. It's very saddening and angering to know so many friends who are victims. But I also know friends who have been named as perpetrators. And that's got me thinking. Obviously there's a line beyond which I can't in all good conscience call someone a friend. But these are men who have, for example, mishandled an internal complaints issue at their workplace when they were in a position of power, or someone who got drunk and said something he shouldn't have at an office party. Things that are wrong, but things that, if I were to be completely truthful with myself, may well have been wrongs that I may have committed in a different situation. And to me, it seems, beyond sort of the legal aspect of things, to me it seems that addressing these cases where we're talking about no cheating, where things that seemed slightly wrong but you couldn't really do anything about them, or things that you didn't know had the capacity to cause this kind of hurt, because you never thought about what it meant, regardless of what it may have meant to your victim, which is a bad word to use. I think we really have to give up this, preserving sort of preciously the informality or the spontaneity or whatever you want to call it of our workplaces, particularly in industries where social relations aren't very heavily regulated. I mean, in journalism it's quite the opposite. Everyone works together because they're friends and works late because they just love hanging out together. You just have to formalize workplace relations, and if that takes the fun out of the workplace, too bad, but that seems to me to be the only way in which you have a certain presumption of equality, in which men and women and people of all genders can operate, can operate on the basis of some equality.
I think, Supriya, one of the things that makes this moment more complicated is the fact that situations that have happened outside the workplace, which have nothing to do, which have perhaps an employee of of your workplace has had a friend and something has gone, and that is now being
with someone outside the workplace.
Sort of somebody's made a complaint and that is now being arbitrated through the workplace ICC,
yes.
Which is what, even as we want to formalize relations within the workplace, the informality of the wide world is now being projected into the workplace, and that's among the challenges that we have to deal with.
Right. Also the fact that these cases may sometimes not be contemporary, in which case you can say, oh, this person has brought our workplace into disrepute, which would be a firing offense or something perhaps less, but things that have happened 20 years ago or so.
What's interesting, that certainly is true, that what does an organization do about something that somebody did a long time ago, and I don't have an answer to that, but it's a legitimate question. What interests me, however, is the point you raised, Naresh, about what does a workplace do. Now, I don't know if you saw the story, but Bloomberg had a story last night, this morning, about Wall Street and how it's changing its rules of relationships between men and women who are colleagues. And I'll take a minute to describe in the context as well. But basically one of the things is that you cannot go out with a woman for dinner. You cannot have a meeting with a woman after 7. These are the rules being told to men. You cannot, if you have a meeting, it should be only with, with glass cabin and that kind of stuff. And on one level it sounds, wow, how wonderful and protective. On the second hand, you can see how patronizing. And the third is it's certainly disrespectful of the women because it severely hampers their career opportunities. Because it means if they need to work with men, and if they are working on a deadline project which goes on there in New York, someone's in Hong Kong, and you need a 15-hour time difference. It reduces their career opportunity. And I've heard this so often from US companies that, you know, a lot of times women are told, look, he's a star performer and he's a rainmaker, and that's why the venture capital companies are coming in giving investment. You know what, I've got a great idea. I'm going to take you away from that project and put you in the other team. Now, which may, in a sense, protect her, but actually it severely restricts her probability and opportunity to rise in the organization. And what it reminds me, and I used to work at Amnesty International, and what it reminds me of was that when British Telecom was going to operate in Saudi Arabia, they came up with solutions of employing women. They're two different buildings, and they can only talk to each other on the phone to get out of the whole Khalawat doctrine. And this is what they had, and they thought it was good. And we said that, you know, of course the perfect should not be the enemy of the good, but it doesn't mean that you try to create something that's so segregationist that you're actually making the cops come alive. And I think the corporations have to be very careful not to let this cop culture emerge within themselves so that women are able to, you know, not protected so much that they are not able to get what they're meant to be doing in terms of career progression.
Of course, what's implied over there is that because men overwhelmingly hold power at the top,
of course,
it creates a situation that wouldn't be the case if you had more women bosses.
Yeah.
Just one of the many things that that the situation.
But women bosses are not necessarily best for women employees.
Sure, which is a completely different.
Yeah.
I'd like to address another point. Everything that we've spoken about until now is what will happen in the future. And in a sense, you're talking about essentially lathi charging a mob, you know, which is out of control, and you're trying to set parameters for them, telling them what to do, what not to do. I would argue that nothing for the future is going to change unless you actually start acting now about how you are raising your sons. And that is the biggest problem in India. Because the problem is how sons are raised, you know, and the fact that, and it begins to be with the simple fact of ensuring that they are taught equality from the start. And that begins in great part by putting them in the kitchen. Because that is the one domain, that men in India still believe is not for them at all. And that teaches you great equality, I think. Because then once you know that making chapatis or whatever is your job as well, then you grow up not acknowledging that you are not inherently superior to the women in your life.
And also, it takes away this idea that, you know, cooking is an inferior job, which it isn't to start with at all. But what you said is so accurate and so good, because when I wrote the book on Bangladesh, one of the sections in the book is about systematic rape of Bangladeshi women during the war in 1970. And I've interviewed about 30 women in an appendix. And this was at the big Jaipur Literature Festival 3 or 4 years ago when I was on a panel, and one student got up, and I know she was a student because she was in school uniform and was 14 or 15 years old. And she said, "Sir, what do we do about this? How can we stop rape?" And this was around the time of the Nirbhay story, and so on was going on. And I, rather than give a glib, patronizing answer, I thought I would ask her what should be done. So I said, "What do you think should be done?" And this is exactly what she said. "Don't you think that we should bring up boys better?" And I think that's the kind of wisdom we have to listen. It's there, and we're ignoring it.
I'd just like to add, this is something that everyone knows, but perhaps tangential to this point is that as we raise, that it's possible to open up new vistas to male children. We still have a problem in India where as our economy grows and as families grow more prosperous, the tendency is to take women out of the workplace where they've gone out of necessity because they have to earn for the family, and to pull them back into the household, which severely restricts their opportunities. That's also perhaps a cultural point that needs to be addressed. I mean, just send your daughters out.
Well, workforce participation rates in India have actually fallen.
Yes.
And they are among the worst in the world right now. I think worse now even than Pakistan. It's actually slid, and it's slid the worst for women who have done their graduate and postgraduate studies. So essentially, these women are highly educated, and finally you want them to give you hot chapatis on the table. I mean, this is what it is essentially, isn't it? And also, I just want to add that there are now enough statistics and studies, and the NSS or whatever it is, all of which come up with the same answer, that among educated people, it's a little less, but not all that much less, is that men and women, young men and young women, think about, what is it, about 40% or something, think it's perfectly alright for a man to beat his wife, and that a wife has to put up with it. This is, as I said, a little higher among the educated class, and lower among the educated class, somewhat lower. But about a third of Indian men and women, at least, think it's perfectly alright to beat or otherwise abuse their wives to keep them in place.
I just wanted to talk about another statistic which I learned about only recently, that the Center for Women's Leadership, which is at the Ashoka University, has done a study on women who have a child and then return to work, and an overwhelming majority, something like 40 to 50, overwhelmingly large number, 40 to 50% of them quit jobs within 6 months of return. So I think the fact that our workplaces are not helpful, friendly, conducive and appropriate for women applies at many levels.
So I have a question, Samar, and maybe to all three of you, to return to Vivek's original idea for the male perspective. What has talking about this stuff been like among male friends? I always feel like my male friends aren't telling me the truth about what they actually think about everything that's happened over the last couple of months. What's it been like for you guys, locker room or no?
It's a very good question, Naresh.
Among my first questions to him was, how do we raise a legal defense fund?
Yeah.
Sort of very practical things to defend Priya. But no, I suppose the horror and the incandescence of the rage is something that hit us so much that night. And of course, since we're journalists, that passes us by as we try to figure out the rules by which we channel that rage onto our pages. But yeah, it's been practical things. I don't have that many friends. I have only one person who's been a close friend who's been named on that list, and there has been ambiguity. I believe his version. It's not a popular version.
Right.
And I couldn't say that in public because I know that there will be, at this moment, it's very difficult to have conversations about who's right and who's wrong. The other thing that I've been telling you about is I'm also called upon now, and since this latest version is played out in the media, to be the judge of on people's careers. If somebody has been called out for what is a relatively minor indiscretion, which if this person had been in the workplace, would have resulted in a reprimand. Now if this person is a freelance, if I were to let this person write for me again, what will the reaction be? How long am I supposed to keep this person's off the pages? So these are things we've been talking about a lot. Not just with men, but with my women colleagues.
I just want to say that the fact, when this panel was announced, they were entirely different panelists. The entire panel dropped out. So these are new panelists that came on board because they were found that they were uncomfortable talking about this because their friends, their colleagues were involved in some way or the other. So that gives you an idea of how uncomfortable and how close this is for people. As I said, and I meant it, I didn't actually mean it facetiously. Your question was a very good question, and it took me some time to think about it. I found among my friends, male friends, some of whom are the ones who are unreconstructed males and were proud about it. It was like a shock to them, and they still don't like to talk about it because this is a whole new world and they don't know how to deal with it. As for myself, I will ashamedly confess that the first thing that came to my mind was, have I behaved inappropriately at any point in my career? And it did. It should not have. The first thing I should not have been thinking about myself, but I did. And I just wondered. And then someone told my wife, your husband is going to be outed soon. I said, really, what did I do exactly? I'm not sure. But the fact that all this came up and came about, show how differently men and women react to this whole thing. So there are lots of friends, some of whom of course a few, and I found that I'm automatically distancing myself from them, those who say that, who start arguing that yeah, this is all very well and this is good and it's required, but anyone who says a but and a serious but of the kind that addresses the question of women will lose out on jobs because they will find it difficult to get jobs because of this. There are people who say that, there are people I know who are saying this as well. So it's best, I think it's given us a reminder of who are the people we should be hanging out with and who we should not be.
So everyone's losing jobs. Women, because men are scared, and men who've been named apparently in this.
Just to very briefly to respond to your question, Supriya, similar thoughts that both Samar and Naresh have said, but another thing that I've seen happen is some defensiveness in this whole idea that she is doing it for publicity, and my response is to rage at them and challenge them, and I've done that. I've done that on Twitter with strangers, but on face-to-face conversations as well. Again, as I said, the segment I talk to is different from what you talk to, only because I'm in England, and the conversation there is about different kinds of issues that have come up at that time. But so yes, it does come up, and it does, and no one wants to talk about it, and people are again waiting to watch who will be the next and who will be named. There's a kind of guessing game that goes on, and some people might be thinking, oh, I'm not yet named yet, kind of a situation, and some of your kind of thinking went through my mind too. Have I ever behaved in any way which is not right? And who knows? But the fact remains that as yet, no. That's what I'm getting the feeling, because people have again threatened that, teri bhi bari aayegi, is what, when I was defending a woman in a particular case, and I was told that it will be your turn next. So who knows where and what will happen, and yes, again, there can be false accusation about anybody, anywhere, at any time, but the probability of that remains low if you acted right and behaved the way you are meant to behave, then I think you don't have anything. If your conscience is clear, you have nothing to worry about.
I don't want to sound preachy, but again, because I know friends on both sides of the aisle, as it were, I feel like maybe one of the things that I would like is also if people didn't, I understand fear, but fear is the enemy of truth. So if you did do something that hurt somebody else, and it came out in the open, maybe we should just get better at apologizing and asking what can I do to make things different. I was interested in everybody. Sorry, Samar, I didn't mean to take over moderator duties, but I was only interested in.
You were supposed to be the moderator.
No.
Decided not to.
No, yeah, I just wanted to say controversial things. The reason I ask is because someone else, another feminist, Shumana Roy, who's a brilliant poet and writer, I believe said earlier today that these Me Too stories made her realize that she didn't have a single male ally. That's not how I'd frame it, but with the best will in the world, with all the energy and with all the anger, I still feel that even my closest male friends aren't really listening to me, and that the only people they listen to is other men. And I want that to be different, but before things become different, I'd just like them to get better.
What do they say? What do they say?
Well, they'll say the right things. I have a friend who went so far as to say, there is going to be collateral damage, but I think that's okay. I think some collateral damage is acceptable. I said, oh, are you just saying this because you're talking to me? And do you really believe that? I hope he does. But more than anything else, I think maybe if you guys are the guys are listening to, then we should take every opportunity we get. Before things become different, let's just start making them better.
Thank you very much.